started the version 2 of my Richlawn Railroad by measuring my new room in my new house. And the challenge was I had a much smaller area than my previous railroad. The room is 12 feet long along the window side by 10 feet across. So that gives me some area to work with, and I knew that I needed around the room shelf type layout to be able to get much space for a model railroad. Now the room came with a nice set of French doors, which I simply reversed to open out instead of open into the room, and that wasn't a very difficult task. I have 2 windows along the front wall, and I knew I needed to do something also to be able to cover the lower area to allow for a backdrop. I painted my walls as sky blue. Why not the entire room? Well, I only painted the part that's going to show above the benchwork. I decided to use track lighting to light the room because I like the fact that you can rotate and aim the heads. And I drew a little diagram of the room, used a handy one-handed thing to install the track, and ended up with the setup working pretty well except for excessive heat. I purchased some 4x8 sheets by 60,000 styrene from a supplier over on the coast near me to cove my corners because I really think they look much better in pictures than square corners. I used Charlie Comstock's method of installing the styrene from the article I read in Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine, and it worked very well and was fairly simple to do. Once the styrene was installed, spackled, and painted, it came out with a very nice finish where you really can't see any of the seams at all. I'm very happy with the results. To handle the windows, I just used some 1/4-inch hardboard, which I glued to some blocks of wood and then painted to match the room. I'm a big fan of Scott Perry's Heart of Georgia or Hog Railroad layout, and had seen it live when I used to be in Georgia. So I decided to use that and modify it to fit my room and expand it, and I definitely wanted a sectional layout in case I had to move again. I designed 7 sections for the layout, with the ones on the sides being 24 inches wide and the one along the back being 35 inches wide. That way they can be moved if I need to move them. A model railroading friend of mine drew up the plan, including the swing gate, and it was the initial start of what would be the Richlawn Railroad layout. The plan was slightly rotated to add interest and to try to keep from tracks running parallel to the edge of the layout. Construction of the benchwork was furniture grade 3/4-inch plywood covered with 2-inch foam and having a hardboard fascia along with a cotton curtain underneath that. And I realized I might have struggles with noise from the foam, but I figured I could deal with that later. I was able to use my father's old DeWalt saw, which is over 50 years old, to cut up the pieces and made sure everything was braced properly, glued and screwed, and then did some fitting together in the garage first to make sure that everything looked like it would line up okay. To connect the sections together, I used 1/4-20 bolts along with fender washers, and then for alignment I used 5/8-inch dowel rods, which I drilled through the sections. And of course I drilled holes for being able to route the wiring for the layout. It can be challenging to find 2-inch foam here in Florida with the climate. However, I was able to find it at Lowe's on closeout and got it for half off the regular price, so I got a really good deal. So as I completed the sections, I put them in the room. You'll notice the corner section there on the right has a lowered area. That was originally for a trestle I was going to put in, which really didn't work out, so I really didn't need to do that. But you know, it's some of the fun of actually doing a model railroad is making adjustments as necessary. And here's an underside view of the layout. I wanted to make it easier to assemble the layout and actually cut through the scenery material, so I used an idea of a ripcord, which originally I used a piece of string, but I think that wouldn't be strong enough, so I used some fishing leader, some stainless steel fishing leader. And so you'd simply lift up and pull through the scenery and make it a lot easier instead of cutting with a saw. I'm way too old to be doing duck unders, so on the one side by the French door I made up a swing gate, which used a piano hinge and some reinforcement. Made sure that the benchwork was secured to the wall so it would be steady, and then I made sure that it would swing all the way open and allow easy entrance into the room. I added micro switches to both sides of the gate to electrically disconnect the track and cut gaps in the track, a foot on either section there in case someone had the gate open when the train was running. One of the advantages of building scenes as dioramas is that you can often move them, and that's the case with Buck and Loretta's trailer scene, which was on my original railroad. I made sure that when I did the plan for this railroad that I would have a place for it, and it ended up nicely in the front right corner. I printed the track plan out in 1:1 scale and taped it on the top of the layout. This way I could check for any problems or interferences and make any adjustments as necessary. This was my very first run of a locomotive on the layout. Of course, it was only 3 feet, but hey, it was a start. I used Midwest cork glued down with adhesive caulk, Microengineering Code 83 track, and Walther's turnouts. The process went fairly quickly, and I used cans to weight everything down. To control the turnouts, I used Tam Valley's singlet controls, so with a servo and a control board. I embedded them in the top of the layout and used brass tubing with wire to control them from the edge of the layout. I tried my hand at painting the backdrop using acrylic paints and watching videos that I'd seen, and really wasn't too happy with how the results came out. I did contact a local artist to see if she'd be willing to paint it, but unfortunately she was too busy. And so even though I did continue to improve, I never really was happy with the results that I achieved. I ended up purchasing a self-adhesive backdrop from Backdrop Junction, and it was very easy to work with them. I had to modify one of the standard ones, and it was a very nice setup as far as being able to put it on to the backdrop. It was fairly easy to install and just took me a very short amount of time, and I really liked the looks of the results. I chose, of course, eastern U.S. Hilly or mountainous areas, which is what I'm modeling with the L&N in the southeastern United States. For scenery, I tried something new this time. I actually used aluminum foil, which I crumpled up and hot glued to the foam backdrop, and then covered it with some masking tape. I could further change it by simply squeezing the areas I wanted to change. I covered everything with a coating of Sculptamold with some brown paint coloring in it. And the process was fairly quick as far as being able to go and make a lot of landscape. I then added plaster and did hand-carved rocks, which I colored using the leopard spot technique and woodland scenics. And then finally added foliage as far as trees and things. And you can see along here there's the doodlebug track that runs around the outside of the layout, which adds a little more interest to it. This panoramic view showing the scenery is distorted. There's no curve like that in the front. It's actually straight, and you're looking around 3 corners of the layout. Gives you an idea of the way that it looks. In St. Matthews, Kentucky, where I grew up, there was a building called Palmer Asbestos that made brake parts. And I wanted to model that in my railroad, so I used the Walther's kit and just kit bashed that. And it does have an operating overhead door. I used a Tam Valley singlet control to be able to automate the door. The servo is mounted in the roof, covered by an air conditioner, and I'll be able to use the control here either using the push buttons or actually use the throttle of the Digitrax controller, since it is DCC controllable. I added a small drainage ditch behind the Palmer building there to add some interest, including cattails. I still have a lot of work to do in this area. I salvaged all the buildings from Hoovertown from my previous layout, and we'll have a town in the back area here. I'll probably build it off of the layout and be able to put it in place, making it much easier to work on the layout. I utilize the space under the layout with a number of rolling carts, including ones for materials, a work area, one that I actually store my rolling stock and also have in a database, and since I'm full-time employed, my work desk where I normally work, which I keep under the layout when I'm not working. When I saw Michael Rose's LED lighting, I was sold. It looked so great on his layout that I decided to put it on mine, including soldering all the boards and all the components together. And one of the nice advantages is a lot less heat in my room as opposed to the halogen lights on my track lighting. To mount the boards, I just used 1x2s and glued on some quarter round so I could get the proper angle for the strips, and just attached them with screws. And here you can see them hanging in the room. They did a much better job of illuminating the layout in more natural colors. I'm really happy with them. The mountain uses plaster cloth over a screen. It's made a portal out of using some crumpled foil, added ground foam to everything, and also added an in-scale water tire complete with a flashing light, and also added a waterfall, which many people didn't like, including myself, so I actually ended up taking the waterfall out of the mountain. I added an in-scale structure using shaper sheet on the mountain, complete with interior light, and also carved the hand-carved cluster rocks, and added a car, or truck rather, to the top there to give a little forced perspective to the mountain. At the base of the mountain, instead of a trestle, I added a water feature with 4 small islands, and then used a combination of green paints to make the colors for the base there at bottom, and used the Envirotex light water along with some clear acrylic on top to create the water. I'm happy with the way the mountain and water feature came out. I still have a lot of work to do on the portals on either end, and we'll continue to work on that going forward. I'm a big fan of Tim Warris's Bronx terminal, especially his faux rusty fascia, and I wanted to do that on my layout. I looked at a number of videos, including the ones the data that he had, and looked at some of them on YouTube, and thought, well, what the heck, I'll give it a try and see if I can make it work on the Richlawn Railroad. I used 3/16 hardboard for the straight flat areas, and in the corners I used styrene 60 thousandths that I had left over from other corners. And then I added strips from PVC at the top and the bottom, and used wood plugs for the rivets. To add texture, I used some caulking, which I stippled on with a paintbrush. In this view here, I've actually added the first layer of paint, which is a red oxide paint I got at the local home supply store. Next, I stippled on some brown paint using a sea sponge, being careful not to obscure all the color beneath it. This gives it a different texture and look. I like the way that Tim added letters to his fascia, and I did the same with mine using wood letters that I glued on. I then added some darker colors along different areas using paints, and also using weathering chalks, and also added orange here and there. I hope you enjoyed this update and look forward to future updates.